I've never been an outdoor enthusiast, but the summer after my second year of college, one of my roommates convinced me to go tent camping with him. It was just for the weekend, and I didn't have any plans, so I agreed to join him. For privacy, I'll call him Jake. Jake was fully equipped for camping. He had a 2014 Jeep Wrangler with the back seat almost entirely filled with camping gear. He preferred finding his own camping spots rather than reserving at established campsites, claiming it was more adventurous. We drove into the Rocky Mountains until we found a clearing large enough to fit the Jeep through. We went off-road, navigating between trees until Jake pointed out a good spot. We set up a fire pit, chairs, and the tent we'd be using for the night. It was around 7 p.m. and the sun was beginning to set. Jake fetched a bag of hot dogs from the car for us to cook over the fire. While cooking the hot dogs, we heard an extremely loud female scream coming from about 300 or 400 feet away, echoing through the trees. Jake and I both turned towards the direction of the screams. Initially, we couldn't make out any words, but then we heard help, please, and no, each one sounding more desperate. The loudest, most terrifying scream was abruptly cut off mid-scream. Jake looked at me with pure horror on his face. We knew the closest man-made structure was the road, far away. No one should have been out here. Whatever had just happened, we needed to leave immediately. We frantically threw our things into the back of the Jeep, shoving the fully assembled tent inside and shutting the door. I tried calling 911 as we drove back to the road. Despite having almost no service, I managed to get through to an operator. I explained what we had heard, and they said they'd send a trooper as soon as possible. It took us twice as long to get back to the road because it was now dark and we couldn't see. Finally, we reached the pavement and stopped for a moment, unsure if we should wait for the police. Then, we saw a figure emerging from the trees. He was wearing jeans and an all-black sweatshirt with the hood covering his face. He was dragging something in a heavy sheet or bag. His head was hanging down as he walked. When the blue and red police lights appeared down the road, he looked in our direction. The man turned and started sprinting back into the forest, abandoning the bag. The police chased after him. The bag contained the remains of a 34-year-old woman. We don't know if they ever caught him. This happened when I was in middle school during the summer. My parents had signed me up for a month-long all-boys summer camp. The campsite was just as you might imagine. 6 or 7 small cabins scattered in the forest, a small lake, a few fire pits, and even a sand volleyball court. It was about 4 hours away from town. The place was old and run down, but still frequently used for summer camps. Upon arrival, I unpacked my belongings in one of the cabins and set up my bed. Some of the kids I would be staying with wanted to explore the forest before we had to return for dinner. The camp rules were pretty relaxed. We were allowed to wander as long as we could still see the cabins. While walking into the forest, one of the kids pointed out something, or rather someone. A man who looked over 50 years old stood a few yards away, staring at us. He appeared almost homeless, with dirty clothes and a scruffy gray beard. We ultimately assumed he was one of the camp counselors. The man gave us a strange smile, and I awkwardly waved back. We ran back to our cabin, and later that night told one of the counselors about it. They took it seriously and went out to check the area, but the man was gone by then. We started to realize that most of the camp counselors were teenagers. No one seemed older than 30. They didn't directly tell us, but it was clear they had no idea who the man was. For the next few days, we didn't explore much, still feeling creeped out. On the 4th night, things got really scary. I woke up to the sound of the cabin door handle rattling. At around 11 p.m., one of the counselors usually knocked on all the cabins to remind the kids to lock their doors and go to sleep. Sometimes we fell asleep before this, and it would wake us up. I thought this was what was happening, but I couldn't tell the time. Being the only one awake, I felt I had to respond. I yelled something about us already being in bed. Immediately after, a flashlight turned on outside, and the light began shining through the windows. Someone was trying to look inside. A couple of the other kids started waking up. I motioned for them to get down. The person outside circled the cabin several times, shining the light through every window. I don't know if they saw me, but the light passed over me several times. After about 5 minutes, the light turned off and silence returned. I explained what happened to the other kids. One of them had a watch and said it was 4 a.m. It wasn't a counselor. We stayed awake until morning. When a teenage counselor came to wake us for breakfast, we told him what happened. He immediately took us to some adult counselors to retell the story. What we heard next was terrifying. The previous night, a kid from another cabin had gone for a walk to use the bathroom. On his way back, he saw someone at our cabin door. At first, he thought it was a counselor, but realized it wasn't when he saw the person trying to pick the lock. The kid described the man as having a beard and wearing dirty clothes, which reminded me of the man we had seen in the forest on the first day. The entire camp was immediately canceled for the kids' safety. That afternoon, a bus took us all back home. Many years later, I did some research and found a small report on the incident. After we left, the police were called in. They found a small tent nearby with essentials and hundreds of Polaroid pictures of the camp, the cabins, the canoes by the lake, the fire pits, everything. Among these were pictures of the kids, mostly taken from a distance or from hidden spots. The most disturbing were the pictures taken at night through the cabin windows. The police waited for someone to return to the tent, but no one ever did. The man was never found. It was late summer, and my wife and I wanted to go on a camping trip before it got cooler. I had plenty of camping gear left from trips with my college friends and wanted to use it again. We decided to go to a spot we used to visit often. It wasn't an official campground, just a cool place we had discovered that I thought my wife would love. When we arrived, we noticed a makeshift fire pit and some trash, indicating that others had found the spot too, but we didn't mind. We set up our tent and started a fire. We spent hours talking and drinking around the fire. Around 2 a.m., we were startled by the sound of a chainsaw starting up. Our initial thought was that someone was cutting down a tree, but it seemed strange for someone to be doing that so late. Our theory was quickly dismissed when we heard maniacal laughter. Now we were truly creeped out. We extinguished the fire and got inside our tent. The sound seemed distant, so we felt somewhat safe. Plus, we had a machete if necessary. Over the next few minutes, it seemed like the noises were getting closer. But fortunately, the engine sound abruptly stopped, bringing us relief. After half an hour of silence, we felt safe enough to try to sleep. And surprisingly, we fell asleep quickly, likely due to the drinks we had earlier. Sometime during the night, I woke up, unsure of what had disturbed me. As I became more alert, I heard footsteps. I sat up to listen better and saw that my wife was already awake. We listened together. There were multiple sets of footsteps, no more than 20 yards away. My wife suggested we run to the car. I told her to wait a few minutes. The moonlight was bright, and I could see the silhouettes of 3 men on the tent wall. I didn't tell her, not wanting to scare her more, but I gripped the machete next to us, dreading the thought of using it. Seconds felt like hours as we watched the shadows. Finally, after a few minutes, I saw the figures walk away. This was our chance. I told my wife it was time to go. We left everything behind, opened the tent, and sprinted to the car. I used the remote start key fob, and as soon as we got in, I floored it out of there. On the drive, I told my wife about the shadows, and she scolded me for not telling her earlier. We spent the night in a hotel. The next morning, we returned to the campsite, but all our gear was gone. Not a single item was left. I still don't know what happened that night. Part of me thinks we were on someone's private property, and this was their way of scaring us off. But it's possible those people meant us real harm. Either way, they now have all our camping gear, and I doubt we'll be going camping again anytime soon.